In this video, I'm going to explain how to draw a line graph in Excel. This is something that you would use if you had an independent variable which was continuous. If you've got an independent variable which is categoric, then you need a bar graph. So let's start off with our table. So first of all, this is my basic data table. If we just remember from the previous video and how to make correct tables, we know that the first thing we need to do is make sure all of these are the same degree of accuracy, which they're not, because this one and this one and this one are no decimal places. So I'm just going to go up here and add a decimal place. Sorry, take a decimal place away and then add one there. And there we are. Everything's now at the same degree of accuracy. Now with a graph, you always, or almost always, certainly in your IAs, you will always draw a graph of the independent variable here against the average. Okay, so you don't graph your raw data. So the first thing to do is to calculate the average. So again, we go equals average, double click on average, select the 5 data points, hit return, go into the little green square, pick up the corner and pull it all the way down, and then say bye error, because I haven't actually made an error. Okay, the average is in the same degree of accuracy as the original data, so that's all fine. Then I'm going to need the standard deviation, because I'm going to want to add standard deviation error bars. And anyway, you should calculate standard deviation because it's an important value. So again, we go equals stdev, select that one, double click, select the 5 data points, not the average, hit return, pick it up, drag it down, bish bash bosh. We will just reduce that to 3 decimal places, and we're going to ignore the error. Now these 2 columns they aren't ruled up, so I'm just going to quickly give them some rules. So now our table is correct. So now what I need to do is think about how to draw the graph. Well, the key thing here is what do you select? What I want to draw a graph of is I want to draw a graph of this column and of this column, but because they're not next to each other, it's a little bit more challenging to get them selected at the same time. To do that, you select the first column. Then if you're working on a Windows computer, you hit Control. If you're working on an Apple, you hit the Command key, and then you select the next column. You do not select the titles, because those are merged cells. You don't need the titles anyway, but they're merged cells. That will make life very complicated. So you just select the numbers. Then you go up here to Insert, and you can see here we've got all of the different types of graphs. Now obviously that is called a line graph, and you think, oh, I should insert line graphs. But what Excel calls a line graph and what we call a line graph is different. We want a scatter graph. So we click on scatter graph, and we want one that doesn't have a line. Okay, so then you select that, and now we've got our chart brought in nicely. I'm just going to shift this off the table because we're going to need to have access to the table in a second. And we can have a look at our chart. So that's all looking very nice. Everything's there. It's looking about right. But there are a few things that we need to add to this graph. Now again, how you do this varies slightly from computer to computer. If you've got this little plus button here, then you can add a chart element from directly there. If you don't, you'll need to come up to the corner here. You can see here we're in the design section of the chart tools menu. So you add chart element. Now what we want is we want an axis title. So we'll put the primary horizontal axis on first, and that was concentration in moles. And again, you put the unit in, and then we want to go add chart element, and we want axis title, and we want primary vertical this time. And so this one is the average time in seconds. Okay, now for chart title, you can just double click on it, select that, and start again. Now the most straightforward way to do a chart title is just simply, how does a graph to show how the independent variable affects the dependent variable? So a graph to show how concentration affects the average time. Done. Okay, and I don't need that side menu either. So there we go. Now, to all intents and purposes, this graph now works, but there are a couple of additional things that you can add. So one of the things that you could add is a trend line. So with the trend line, this is obviously linear, so you want to have a linear trend line. Another thing that you can add with the trend line is if you go into the menu for the trend line and you go to more options, you can see that down here you've got the opportunity to display the equation. So that if you needed for whatever reason to calculate the gradient of the line or to calculate an x-intercept, then that's handy. Or you can display the r-squared value, which is basically a correlation coefficient, which if you are doing a correlation type of experiment, then that can be quite handy too. Okay, so those are additional things that you can add with the trend line. The thing that you will all need to add are error bars. So I'm going to talk you through how to add the error bars. Now, to be able to add the error bars, you're going to need to be able to select this column here. So you need to make sure that your table is not over that column. So what you do, you go to your add chart element. You go to error bars. Now you can see that it gives you the opportunity to add standard deviation error bars. But you can also see from what the computer has then done that that's ridiculous. So we don't add the computer generated error bars. What we do is we go to more error bar options. Again, this will crop up in slightly different ways on different computers, but it's all the same. So we want the vertical error bar. So make sure you've got vertical error bar. We want to come down to custom and we want to go to specify value. That will then come up with this little window, and what you then do is you select your standard deviations, okay, and then you go to the negative error value, delete what's in there, and then select your standard deviations again, because that means that the error bar will then be plus and minus your standard deviation, which is what you want, and then you go OK. I would then suggest that you get rid of that graph there. Now you can see that what it's done is something kind of weird, because it has given you these horizontal error bars which we don't want. So you can select those and just hit delete, and then it disappears. And what you can see also here is that this is correct because these error bars are tiny, you can hardly see them, and this one is massive, and if you have a look you can see right here that this one is much bigger. That is because of that data point there, which is clearly anomalous. So probably if you were using this data for real, you would actually exclude that data point from calculating your averages. But for now, what we have got is a line graph correctly drawn, correctly labelled with the correct error bars.